Hello, everybody. Welcome to another lesson in the free web development bootcamp. The last couple lessons, it's been paired programming with me and Jess. Today's going to be just me, but don't worry, Jess is around as well. We're going to be continuing to doing pair programming, and she'll be offering some lessons when I'm not around. And can I just say how lovely it is to see everybody here? I just want to take a minute to say hello to everyone. I love to see folks saying good day, good morning from all sorts of parts of the world. It's just wonderful to see you. If you're tuning in the first time, hi, my name's Ramon. We're running a set of free development boot camps. In January until early February, we're going to be doing free web development. And in mid-February, we're going to be kickstarting a JavaScript boot camp. So it is absolutely wonderful to see you all. Hello. Oh, it's just love to see folks tuning in and saying hi. Thank you so much. If you're curious about the bootcamp itself and you're like, oh no, am I too late? Don't worry. First of all, this is all recorded. So yes, I'm live now doing some exercises and answering questions, but if you head over to youtube.com/@badwebsiteclub, you'll find all the past recordings of our boot camps as well as guest sessions. I need to organize those into playlists. I'll get better at that. Just a couple links before we get started as well. By joining this boot camp, you do agree to abide by our code of conduct. Please make sure that you behave and interact with each other in a way that's conducive to the spirit of the boot camps. So if you're not sure, please take a look at this bit.ly/BWC-COC. If you find anything out of sorts, please get in touch. How to get in touch? Well, I'm going to paste a link here into our Discord channel. You will need to do a little verification step in order to join the conversation, but there you go. I've pasted it in the chat as well. You can join the Discord conversation. One last thing. Oh, yes, absolutely. If you want to follow along with the schedule, let me hide that banner. There we go. If you want to follow along with the schedule, you can head over to this link here, badwebsiteclub/webdev-bootcamp-jan-2024.html. And there you'll find not just all of the important links that I've been throwing out here, but also a link to a Google Calendar so you can just sort of plop that into your calendar app of choice. So that's enough of me blabbering on. Let me give a little bit of context of what we were doing. So yesterday, it's empty on my end because Jess was doing all of the coding. Yesterday, we started out with basic CSS by building a cafe menu. And I was quite mean, and I gave out some homework to do the rest of the exercises. I think we got until step 46. So the homework was to do the rest of them. Now, I want to be very, very clear. If you didn't make it until the end, don't stress. We're doing a lot. The point is to do this at your own pace and join in for these lesson sets to be asking questions, to answer each other's questions. This is meant to be a collaborative learning experience as well. And as I said, this is all recorded, so don't stress. Today, we're going to be doing the next set of exercises, which is this learn CSS colors by building a set of colored markers. And I'm quite excited about this. I just love colors in general. And this is a big part of CSS. We might have learned already in the last 2 days that HTML has more to do with the content, or as Jess likes to call it, or as Jess very, very well called it, the furniture, whereas the CSS is more the paint. So I'm going to drop a link to that lesson if you want to follow along. I would recommend doing it with me sort of in a let's paint together kind of way, because that's what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to click here on Start Project, and let me just make sure, folks, give me 1 sec. Let me just make sure that I've got the chat here on the side so that if y'all have any questions, y'all can just let me know in the chat, and of course, Discord, wherever you like, and we'll do that accordingly. So this is what we're going to be building today. And as I said, we're going to get as far as we can, and then I'm going to let you all go and do some homework for tomorrow, when we'll be learning the next set of lessons. Cool. So we're going to be building a CSS colored marker page with some cool looking markers. And these are all made with code. I mean, how cool is that? We're drawing with code. So let's start coding. Now, our first step, and this is something we've already done a couple times, is to start with the scaffolding, the structure that we're going to see in pretty much every HTML file. We see here in index.html. So I'm going to start out with that doc. Oh, I always forget. Is it exclamation mark doc type HTML, and then below that I'm going to put HTML, whoopsie, and then close that HTML, and that HTML element needs a lang attribute with the value of en for English. Let's go ahead and check my code. Oh, wow. I thought I was going to mess up the doc type part. Cool. We're done. We can go on. We've done this before, so I'm going to sort of go a little bit more quickly to it so we can get to the new stuff. So we've got our HTML. Inside that HTML, we're going to nest a head element. And just after that head element, remember we need to close it. We're also going to include a body element. This is stuff that we see in pretty much every website. So there's our head and our body. We can check our code, and it passes, and we can move on to the next exercise. Until we get to the more new stuff, I'm going to go a little bit quickly. So let's see. The title element gives search engines extra information about the page. Remember, the title element is the stuff we see here. I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor, but here at the very top of the window, where my browser is, you can see it says learn CSS colors by building. Oh, actually, by hovering it, you could. Oh no, you can't see it. I'm sorry. By building a set of colored markers, and this is where the title comes in. So it's not something that we see all the time, and sometimes I even forget it's there. But it's helpful for the Google search engine or other types of search engines to know where it is. Oh yeah, it says right here, browser tab for your page when you hover on it. Fantastic. So we're going to add a title element here. Stuff we've done before. I'm going to close it. I'm going to call it colored markers. And I'm going to open the door because it's getting a little bit stuffy. There we go. Sorry about that. So colored markers, check our code, and there we go. All set. We can move on to the next challenge. Cool. So you might get this pop-up free. So just to clarify, we are doing this bootcamp for free, but Free Code Camp is providing these materials for us, and they also do them for free. So only if you can send in a donation. For example, I'm doing so in another account. This is more my teaching account. So you can do that, but don't be stressed to only when you can. So I'm going to click on Ask Me Later here. Cool. Folks, if you've got questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. If not, I'm going to just power through here until we get to our color. So we're going to do our meta. We did this yesterday as well to establish which kind of characters we can display on our website. UTF-8 is a standard of characters that shows most characters. For example, the O, you know how you can see my name, there's an accent on the O in my name? This is something that would be able to be displayed with this meta tag. And it's a self-closing tag, so we don't need to provide a closing tag. And it looks good. We'll move on to the next step. Hello, bonjour. Sorry, my French is not good, but it's good to see you. Cool. So we can have lots of meta tags. The next one we're going to include is this viewport one. I don't know if y'all remember from yesterday, but this one is allowing us to display the website better in a mobile device, like a phone. So meta. So we'll give the name set to viewport, and content is going to be this chunky piece of text here, which just tells it, hey, adjust the width accordingly with a phone. Hello. Look at folks dropping in and saying hi. I love it. Thank you. Makes me feel like I'm doing this with lots of friends. So there's our meta tag. We can check our code and it looks good. Again, this is stuff we've done before. And this is something that we're going to be doing a lot when we make websites. All right, now it's time to add content. Of course, we haven't seen anything yet because we've been displaying it we've been adding metadata to our head. So here we go. Let's nest an H1 inside our body element. And that's going to be the heading. I'm going to call that CSS color marker. Markers. Y'all are going to discover that I'm really bad at typing. So there's our H1, and we're all set. Fantastic. Oh, so I got a question from Tenzing. Ramon, could we add the name and content attributes with the first meta tag rather than creating a separate meta tag? No, I would recommend that you do this in separate ones because each of these represents a different part. First, we want to have one dedicated. Hey, this is a meta tag that gives you information about the character set. And this one is one that gives you information about how to display the web page. And several websites are going to have lots of different meta tags. I would recommend looking that up on MDN as well. We can do that after the lesson during the Q&A if we have time. Cool. So that's the H1 all done. So, great. So now we're going to be, and you're going to see here a new tab. We've got a styles.css file. And y'all might remember from yesterday, we started writing CSS in a separate file. So first thing we're going to do is link that so that our browser uses that CSS file when displaying our HTML. Sorry, I talk a lot and then I need to drink. No problem, Tenzing. I'm glad I could help. Hello, hello, welcome everyone. Okay, so we need a link element in the head element. So I'm going to put this below title. I have a link element here. So it's going to have two attributes. First is a rel attribute, which tells it what kind of thing we're linking to. This is a style sheet. That's the CSS. And we're going to have a ref. Remember, this is the reference to where on the internet our CSS file lives. And it just so happens this is in the same folder. Remember, we're displaying files essentially. So this CSS file is in the same folder as HTML. So instead of having a full address, this is called a relative address. So it's relative to the HTML. And I believe these are self-closing. Is that correct? We can verify now when we check our code. And you see, these aren't things that I have memorized. A lot of the times we need to look this up. But it looks good. Hey, we've linked our style sheet to styles.css. All set. Let's move on to the next challenge. Now we're going to write some CSS. So we're going to write a CSS rule that targets the H1 element. I'm going to use our curly brackets. Remember, target, and inside the curly braces or the curly babies, we're going to assign some properties. And this property is going to be the text align property. Remember, we did this yesterday. So we're going to figure out how to align the text in our document. And the value, we need a colon. The value is going to be one of several we could have. In this case, we need center. You're going to check it out. It moves over to the center. If we want to remember from yesterday, we can move it over to the right. But for this case, we're going to have it just be center. There we go. We've done this before. Looks good. Let's move on to our next challenge. So now we're going to start adding some elements that we're going to style into color markers. So first, within our body element, we're going to add a div. Remember, we saw divs yesterday. These are essentially just boxes, containers, rectangles. They don't really have a semantic meaning other than, hey, this is a box that I want to style in a specific way or put stuff inside. It's a box. So the class is going to be set to have the value container. Make sure the div element is below the H1, which we can see. Now, y'all might be wondering, okay, you've added this div, but it doesn't show up. So it is there, but because it doesn't have any content or any properties or any styles, it looks invisible. But trust me, it is there. So we can check our code, and it looks good. Nice. So we'll just move on along. So inside our div container, we're going to add another div. Oop, if I could spell that correctly. There we go. And we're going to call this class marker. Oop. I'm sure I'll get this right. There we go. So again, now we've got a div inside a div, but because this div inside a div doesn't have any content or any styles, it still looks invisible. But again, it's there. It's a div inside a div. Tesla says divs within divs. Exactly. Cool. So check our code. It looks good. Feel free to stop me if y'all have any concerns or questions, please. So we're going to start adding some color to our marker. So remember that one way to add a color is with the color keyword. And we saw that yesterday. We had black. Do you remember Jess showed us Rebecca Purple, which is quite a cool name for a color. Wish I had a color name after me. I want a Ramon Purple. That's my favorite color. Cool. So we'll create a new CSS rule that targets the class marker. Remember to target an element with a class. Remember, if we do it just like that, then that's an element. If we do it with a full stop and a name, that's for an element that has a certain class. And if we do it with a hashtag followed by the name, then it's an element that has a certain ID. But hey, we will not see any changes after adding the CSS. Interesting. So it's a CSS rule that targets the class marker. So that's full stop and then marker. Because if I did it like this, remember, then it would be looking for an element called marker. But we're looking for an element that has the class marker. So we will set the background color of our marker to be red. And look, it doesn't show up. The reason is our divs are there, but because they don't have any content or any styles that give them a width or a height, we don't see it. Check out what happens if I, just for fun, well, it's a bit cramped. Yeah, if I just for fun in here put an H2 called blah, hello, bad website club. Close it. Check it out. So because that H2 now gives that marker some width and height in order to display the content, then the background color shows up. At this point, I'm just going to delete this line. At this point, there's no width and height, so we don't see it. It is there. It does have a red background color. It's just not there. Well, sorry, it is there, but we don't see it because it doesn't have that width and height. Let's check our code. It looks good. So we'll move on. And yeah, because the div element has no content, it doesn't have any height by default. So in our marker CSS, we will set the height to be 25 pixels and the width, still don't see it because we don't have a width. Oh, sorry, we do have a width, which by default covers the full width. The width property is going to be 200 pixels. Cool. There it is. So now we have 25 pixels tall, 200 pixels wide. Let's check our code. Fantastic. And now we can see it, which is great. So what's next? The marker would look better if it was centered on the page. And an easy way to do this is with a margin shorthand. Yesterday, we did a little bit of like margin left and margin right. But if we want to do, because we can have a margin top and a margin bottom as well. And this is the spacing that is shown up in a div. I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. But if we want to center the marker on the page, we can set its margin property to auto. This sets margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left all to auto. Let's see what happens. We're going to play with this around a little bit just to make sure we fully get it. So there we go. It's centered. Now, hold on a minute. It's centered here, but it's not centered in the full page. We set the margin to autos. Exactly. Well said, Mason. Much better than me. Yeah, so it is centered, but the top and bottom aren't really centered, are they? Tell you what, let's play around with this a little bit just to find out why. Because remember, our marker is inside a container. And I bet this container isn't tall enough to cover the full page. And we can verify that by what I call background color debugging, which is something I do all the time. So let's do some CSS to target the container, make its background color blue. Now you see, the container is not really covering the full height. It's only as tall as its contents. Remember, we learned that about divs. So what if we make the height of the container 100%? Cool. Now it's covering the full page. I was expecting to have the margin top show everything, but it turns out it doesn't. And I'm going to be honest with y'all. I'm not sure why. Because I would have expected it to be centered. And I think to vertically center it, we would use something called Flexbox. But let's not worry about that too much right now. What's important is that we're horizontally centering it. We can get to try and vertically center it later on. Trust me. But yeah, so another way to write margin auto is to type in margin top auto, margin left auto, margin right auto, margin left, bottom auto. Now the problem, so this is the equivalent of writing all of this. Now you might be wondering, why would I want to do this when I can do this? Well, sometimes you want to give a specific margin for the top, the left, the right, and the bottom, but sometimes you want to set them all to be the same. And this is what's called a shorthand. It's for lazy software developers like me in order to not have to write too much code. So that looks good. Does the code agree? And it does. Fantastic. Let's keep going. So now that we've got one marker centered with color, it's time to add other markers. Oh, Cesium, thank you so much. I think that's because of margin collapse, which is a very confusing concept, in my opinion, and not something we need to worry about learning right now. And I hope that something that's coming through here is that, we don't need to understand everything to the letter right now. As long as we have a sort of common understanding of the essentials, then we can start experimenting and understanding those more like finicky points later on. Thank you so much, Cesium. Cool. So we're going to add two more markers. So in the container div, add 2 more div elements and give them each a class of marker. Okay. Here's the thing though. I already have a div with class marker. Can I? Am I allowed? Yes, I am. I'm going to copy this because I'm lazy. Copy and paste. Now I've got 2 markers. I need 2 more, so I'm going to need 3 in total. I'm just going to paste again. So now we've got 3 divs with the class marker. Right now it looks like one chunky marker, but we're going to fix that in just a minute. So check our code. It looks good, and we'll keep going. Whew, okay. While you do have 3 separate marker div elements, they look like one big rectangle. So we should add some space between them to make it easier to see each element. Aha. So now we're going to use some of that margin stuff that I talked about earlier in order to set the top and bottom margin as well as the left and right margins. Because right now we've got a margin set to auto, and that means that top, bottom, left, and right margins are auto. But if I want the top and bottom to be 10 pixels, a shorthand for this is to have 2 values. Whoopsie. So 2 values here. So the margin, this first one is going to say, okay, cool. The top and bottom margin are going to be 10 pixels, and the left and right margins are going to be auto. Does that make sense? So if I wanted it the other way around, for example, if I wanted the top and bottom margin to be auto and the left and right one to be 10 pixels, then I would do it like this. Of course, that's not what we want. Now you might be wondering, cool, but Ramon, how do I memorize this? I'm going to be honest, I rarely do, and I sometimes forget. Oh, cool. Let's see. Nikita's asking, if we put 10 pixels margin top, bottom for all 3, the margin space will be 20 pixels, right? Absolutely right. In fact, we can confirm that. Can we confirm that? Yeah, let's confirm it, and I'll tell you how we'll do it. Let's do a little bit of that classic background color debugging that I like doing. Now, I might be wondering, like, is this a best practice? Is like, look, if it gets the job done, then that's what's important. So check it out. Ooh. Now that's interesting. I would expect the marker to have 10 pixels from the top and bottom of the container. And I don't know why it doesn't yet, but I'm sure we'll figure out why. However, yeah, it should have 10 pixels at the top and bottom. I'm actually kind of annoyed by this. Let's find out. Let me make a comment. Oh, remember how to make comments? So /*. Oopsie. There's our star. I'll comment that out because I don't want to delete that just yet. Margin top 10 pixels. Interesting. I don't know why the margin from the top. I think this is that margin collapse that you were talking about, Cesium. And I think this is something we're going to learn to mitigate later on. Let's not worry about that too much right now, but check it out. So right now the margin top is 10 pixels. Now we'll set the margin bottom to be 10 pixels. Huh. That didn't make a difference. I think it has to do with this margin collapse stuff we were talking. Hold on. Did it really not make a difference? Huh. Well, that's odd, isn't it? What if I just leave in the margin bottom? Okay. I bet this has to do with that margin collapse stuff, and it's going to come up in a lesson. Sorry to confuse y'all. See, Cesium already beating me to it. It actually won't be 20 because of margin collapse thing I mentioned. Vertical margins from very different elements lay over the top of each other. Thank you, Cesium. What happens if we have a bigger value? Then it should be bigger. Let's try it out. Yeah, see? See, this is what happens when I get ahead of myself. Sorry, everybody. The top margin about 30 to see if that makes a difference. Yeah, let's give that a try. I mean, we're here, right? We can experiment. Margin top, maybe 30 pixels. Margin bottom should be 10 pixels. So that's interesting. If I remove the margin bottom, it still looks good. Okay, that looks big. What if I... Interesting. I bet this margin collapse stuff is going to come up in just a minute. I hope that wasn't confusing, everybody. Yeah, let's leave it as it was. So we've got our 10 pixels top and bottom and our automatic horizontal margin. Check our code. It looks good. Okay, first thing we're going to do is give our markers different colors, and we're going to be doing this by having multiple classes on an element. Because yeah, a class can have more than one element. Sorry, let me try that the other way around. An element can have more than one class. So for example, in here, we have a div that has two classes, animal and dog, and these are separated with just a space. So if you want to have several classes, you can have as many as you like, you just need to put a space between them. And this means, by the way, that a class, say if it's a class made up of more than one word, cannot have spaces in it. And I'll show you how to do, just out of curiosity's sake. Say I wanted to have a class called first one. I would do that if I wanted to. Let's say this div called marker wanted to have a class called first one. Instead of doing first one, this is going to be 3 classes because of the space. So class names should never have spaces in them. Instead, we use a dash. This is a common convention in HTML that I would definitely recommend. Sticking to this convention of using a dash. Oh, I'm very glad that I could help by trying that out. Yeah, so if you want to have multiple classes, spaces. If you want to have a class with more than one word, use a dash. So, cool. Add the class 1 to the first marker div. So we have marker 1. Oh, and the order shouldn't matter here because we're doing different things with it. So it can be one marker or marker 1. It's fine. I'm going to go with marker 1 because it reads nicely. Marker 1, marker 2, and marker 3. I would expect. Looks good. Let's keep going. So now we're going to remove the background color from all of our markers. So now, don't worry, they're not going anywhere. It's going to look like they're disappeared, but that's because they're going back to their default transparent color. So now I suspect that we're going to, So now the 1 marker is going to have the background color of red. Nice, cool. Looks good. And now we're going to add the classes 2 and 3 to our other markers. So now I've got 2 and 3. Don't worry, they're still in. They doesn't look like they're there, but they're still there. They just need some background color. Awesome, cool, looks good. Let's move on. So 2. Oh, hold on. That targets the class, so that's a dot 2. And have a background color of green. Hey, there it is. And sorry, it's a bit difficult to work with limited space. There we go. 3 is going to have a background color, if I could spell, there we go, of blue. So red, green, and blue. So now we have separate. And this is the magic of classes, by the way, because all markers are going to have these properties, the width, the height, and the margin. But just the 1 marker is going to have this one, just the 2 markers going to have this one, and the 3 markers going to have that one. In theory, you could use IDs here as well, because ideally there's going to be just one marker. But we're going with classes, totally fine. I think a common thing here is to not get too caught up in what best practice is. Oh, we got a question. For assigning the same CSS property for 2 separate classes, is this the correct way? Dot class 1, comma, dot class 2, and then the curly brackets. Yes, precisely. The comma here is going to be the way to do it. Thanks for your question. All right, let's check our code. Looks good. Let's keep going. All right, time to find a new, let me try that again. So now we're going to start using a new way to make colors. And this is going to be super fun. I'm super excited. So what we're going to be using is something called the additive RGB model. So in computer screens, most of the time, a pixel is shining light to us, right? And each pixel needs to be told how much red, how much green, and how much blue in order to display to us. Oh, hello. Happy Wednesday to you too. Yeah, so it's going to have those 3 numbers, and these go from 0 to 255. You might be wondering why 255. This is a digital way of displaying numbers that is, I think it's 8-bit or something like that. I'm bad at math. Yeah, I think it's 8-bit. So it's a number from 0 to 255, 2 to the power of 8 possible values for either red, green, or blue. I just said a bunch of words. Let's play around with it and you'll see what I mean. Oh, Cesium, thank you so much. Just be sure to put that period before class 2 as well. Absolutely. So we're going to target container. And instead, for our background color, instead of writing in a specific color like blue or black or Rebecca purple, I love that color. Instead, we're going to be using this RGB function. When we think about functions in programming, what you're usually going to say is, please give me this code that's executed, and I'm going to give you a couple of values or parameters, right? And the parameters here are going to be 3 numbers: how much red, how much green, and how much blue. First thing we're going to do here is put 0, 0, and 0. That's no green, no red, no red, no green, and no blue. And always in that order. First red, then green, then blue. Look familiar? Check it out. First red, then green, then blue. So if there's no color, then we get black. Cool. Before we start playing around with colors, I'm just going to move on to the next challenge. So all done. That's fantastic. Ah, look at that. A function is a piece of code that can take input and perform a specific action. Exactly. So it's going to take as an argument or a parameter. Sometimes I'll mix these words up, but they're essentially in this context meaning the same thing. So this function takes 3 arguments. I'll go with free code camps wording. 3 arguments: red, green, and blue. And this is a number that goes anywhere from 0 to 255. Oh, I like this. 0 means there's 0% of that color. 255 means there's 100% of that color. So in the one CSS rule, replace the color keyword red with the RGB function. For that RGB function, we're going to set the value for red to be 255, green to 0, and blue to 0. And y'all are going to see something cool. It's going to look exactly the same. So red is equivalent to RGB 255, 0, 0. No change, which is pretty cool. So it looks exactly the same. This is how we defined red. We called the RGB function and did 255, 0, and 0. You might be wondering, but Ramon, why would I do this when I can just type in red? Sure, but there's a whole bunch of other colors that don't exist as a color keyword. And this is where these combinations come in. Awesome, we did it. I'm going to address a question here. When working with elements next to each other, what's the rule for setting a space between them? Did you adjust the margin or padding first? How did you know which to adjust first? When working with elements next to each other, what's the rule for setting a space between them? Do you adjust, the margin or the padding first? How do you know which one to adjust first? Let me bookmark this question and get back to it during the Q&A because it's a great question, but I want to continue with colors for now. And Mason has a great answer, so I'm going to answer that too. We'll get to it in a bit. So submit and go to the next challenge. So background color for our marker is still red. That's because you set the value of the RGB function to the max of 255. And nothing for the others. So we're going to do the same for green and blue now. And y'all might be able to guess here what this will look like. So instead of green, we're going to type in RGB. Now, how much red? 0 red. How much green? 100% green or 255 green. How much blue? No blue, thank you. Look at that. It's a much more intense green. So this green, and this is good, you're going to see this with a lot of these keyword colors. This green is not as bright as this green. Now, what I suspect is going on here, and this is just a guess, mind you, this might be not 100% green. Maybe something like here. Looks a little bit more similar. Maybe it's like 105. See, that's how we can, I've adjusted the amount of green. It's less than half, it seems. And that's how you get, but we want that 100% green. Is that correct? Yeah, the maximum. Fantastic. So let's do the same for blue. RGB. So no red, no green, yes blue. So there's our blue. Amazing. So they look pretty much the same. This green is brighter, but that's cool. Check our code. Looks good. And we'll keep going. See? This is because the green color keyword is actually a darker shade, which is about halfway between black and the maximum color for green. In the to CSS rule, let's set that green value to be 127. So that's the exact color. There you go. Now you see it was just a guess. There we go. Check our code, and looks good. So, colors with math, very well put. So now we're going to add some more. Here it comes. So in the container CSS rule, use the shorthand padding. So not margin, but padding. We'll get to that in a minute. To add 10 pixels to the of top and bottom padding and set the left and right padding to 0. This works similarly to the shorthand margin property that we used earlier. Cool. Let's see how we did that margin stuff. So margin is top and bottom and then left and right. Good to know. So if we want the top and bottom padding to be 10 pixels, then we'll start with that. So padding colon 10 pixels. Well, that is promising. So 10 pixels and left and right padding will be set to 0. Nice. Now that we have some padding, let's remove some margin and see what happens. So I'm going to remove the margin from our markers because now it's going to get a little bit more weird. So now you see, for example, we've got top and bottom padding. And Jess has this really great metaphor for it. The padding is the amount of bubble wrap inside a box. That's the padding, how much padding is inside that box before you can start putting stuff in it. Whereas the margin is the space around your box. So padding is inside your box, margin is outside your box. Now that we've added some padding, what happens if I set a margin top here? 10 pixels. Now that we have some padding, our margin is being taken into account. And this is that margin collapse we're talking about. And I'm sure we're going to see it here as well. So don't fret too much about it. We'll get to it. Auto. So great. Now our padding and margin are being applied properly, which is fantastic. So yeah, padding, 10 pixels, top and bottom, 0 pixels, left and right. I hope this looks good. What a relief. Amazing. So in our RGB color model, primary colors are colors that when combined create pure white. But for this to happen, each color needs to be at its highest intensity. So we're going to set our green marker to be pure green. So by pure green, this is going to be 100% green or 255. Cool. Now it's pure green. Mitch very well puts the element border is between padding and margin. And we're going to get to borders in this bootcamp as well. So, great. So now that we've got the primary RGB colors, it's time to combine them. So the RGB function in our container rule, we're going to set all three values to be 255. So if there's no color, it's going to be black. If there's full color, whoopsie. If there's full color, let's take a look. Red and green combined gives us yellow. That's quite a bright yellow. If I combine all three, it gives us white. So it's not transparent, it's white. Let's see what happens if I set it to be 155 for all of them. Just for fun, because I can. We get gray, right? Because it's all three are the same value, but because it's not 100%, it's a darker shade of white, which is gray. So there we go. So all three are set to 100%, which gives us white. Fantastic. It works. Looks good. Let's move on. Ooh, so now we're going to set secondary colors that you get when you combine primary colors. And we notice some secondary colors when we combine the red, green, and blue. So we're going to update the RGB function to combine pure red and pure green. And we already saw that combining pure red and pure green gives us yellow. This is called a secondary color because yellow is a combination of red and green. Looks good. I wonder what the other ones will be. So now we're going to create cyan, which is a shade of blue, I believe. So in 2, we're going to combine green and blue. It's going to give us cyan, which is sort of like lightish blue. I love this stuff. It's how did you put it, Mason? Colors with math. I love it. And ooh, color. The next one is magenta. That's combining pure blue and pure red. Happens to be one of my favorite colors. My favorite color is violet, but I like magenta as well. So that's red and blue gives us magenta. Lovely. Awesome. So these are the 3 secondary colors. Ooh, now that we're familiar with secondary colors, we're going to do tertiary colors. And that's when you combine a primary with a nearby secondary color. So we're going to update our RGB function in 1 so that the red is at the max value, which is this, and green is 127. And I'm just guessing, huh? I think it's going to give us orange. Right? Because it's like closer to red than yellow and green. So it's like orange, kind of a mixture of red and yellow. This is orange. That's pretty cool. Awesome. So what's the next one? I wonder. So spring green is a combination of maximum green and half blue. So 127 for blue is going to give us spring green. Oh, I like that color. And this is another tertiary color. It's quite fun to experiment with these. I like it a lot. And the next one, violet. Hey, that's my favorite color. So blue is maximum and red is 127. Love this color. Yeah, so that's a tertiary color. Amazing. There are 3 more tertiary colors. Chartreuse, I'm probably mispronouncing that. Chartreuse green, which is green and yellow. Azure, which is blue and cyan. And rose, which is red and magenta. So we're going to flip them around. Cool, cool, cool. So in 1 is going to be red is going to be 127 and green is going to be maximum. That's chartreuse green. In 2, we're going to get azure by doing just flipping these around. So 127 green and maximum blue gives us azure. It's a very pleasant color. And rose, sometimes called bright pink, is going to be 127. Oh, that is a bright pink. And this is called rose. So these are another set of tertiary colors. That's cool. I love how quickly you can get those out, you know? So we've got all of the primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. It'll be easier to understand what color theory concepts and how they impact our design. So we are going to, let's see, in the 1, 2, and 3, we're going to adjust the values to be pure black. So in order to get pure black, we're going to do 0 for everything. Oopsie. 0, 0. I hope I'm doing this right. 0. So now everything is going to be 0, which means our markers are all going to be pure black. Fantastic. Amazing. Ooh. So now we're going to be doing something. A color wheel is a circle where similar colors or hues are near each other. Right? Pure red is between the hues rose and orange. So 2 colors that are opposite from each other on the color wheel are called complementary colors. If 2 complementary colors are combined, they produce gray. But when they're placed side by side, these colors produce a strong visual contrast and appear brighter. So in our RGB function, we're going to set red to be 255. And for our 2, we're going to set the opposite colors. See how they're opposite? So green and blue are set to maximum to produce cyan. So you see how these values are opposite of each other? This is called what do they call it? It is an opposite color, right? Complementary color, sorry. So red is complementary to cyan. And this is actually what happens when you do that sort of invert of colors. You might have seen like when you can invert colors and it kind of looks a little bit like a shocking moment in a film or something, this is what's happening. You're taking all of these colors and flipping their values. It's quite cool. Awesome. So yeah, that's the opposite of red, cyan. So what else we got? And they're very bright next to each other. And this contrast can be distracting if it's overused on a website and can make text hard to read if it's placed on a complementary colored background. It's better practice to choose one color as a dominant color and use its complementary color as an accent to bring attention to certain contents on the page. Ooh. Okay. So in our H1 rule, we're going to use the RGB function to set its background color to cyan. And cyan is using RGB 0, 255, and 255. And there we go. So our H1 now has this background color of cyan. Great. Now, in our one CSS rule, use the RGB function to set the background color to black. And in our 2, we're going to use that RGB to set it to red. Interesting. 0, 0. Well, this contrast is sort of drawing my attention to both the heading and that red marker. Something that happens when we're looking at a website very quickly. See, notice how your eyes are naturally drawn to the red color in the center. So this is how we can use design by complementary colors to draw attention to certain parts of a website. But we'll learn more about these complementary color combinations as well later on. For now, we're going to use that RGB to set our marker back to black and move on to our next exercise. Oh, and we're going to remove that background color from our H1. Makes sense. So now we're sort of back to the beginning. Excellent. Now, time to add some further details to our markers. So in our first marker div element, let's change the class 1 to red. Makes sense? That's more descriptive, more semantic, because it's the red marker. Notice it's gone, though. That's because the one class is set to do the color. But because we've replaced that one class with red, there's actually no styles in here that do anything with the red class. And I bet we're going to be switching that around later on. So we've changed the class 1 to red. Looks good. I don't see it, but it is there. See, update the one CSS rule to target the new red class. And now we're going to see that color come back. Makes sense. Cool. Let's keep going. Now we're going to update the RGB function to set that red CSS rule so its value is at the max. So that's 255. Now that's a red marker. Great. So next, we're going to do the same for the 2 to green and 3 to blue. So green and blue. And again, it looks like they disappeared, but now we know it's just that those very specific color classes aren't being applied. Amazing. Look at that. We're almost halfway there. I get to almost give y'all homework. I'm going to go a little bit further because I want to do some of the more like intense color stuff because it gets really interesting. So, yes, so the 2 needs to be updated to be green. And now we're going to see that green one mark come back and blue is going to come back. Yay. There we go. Fantastic. Now we're going to, and we're going to be learning about the most common way of writing colors, which is with hexadecimal. And hexadecimal comes from a number base called hexadecimal. When we count with a base 10, right? We go from 0 to 9. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we add a digit. 10 is 1, 0. Then 11 is 1, 1. 12 is 1, 2, and so on and so forth. Binary is similar. We have only 2 possible numbers, 0 and 1. When it comes to 2, that becomes 1, 0. Looks like a 10, but it's actually a 2. This is because it's written in base 2. For hexadecimal, we go from 0 to 15. But the problem is when we count to 10, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, there's no symbol to represent the 10 unless we add a digit. So when we're writing hexadecimal, 10 is represented by an A. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A is 10, B is 11, C is 12, D is 13, E is 14, F is 15. And then when we get to 16, then we add a digit. So 1 0 in hexadecimal represents 16. Weird. But don't worry too much about it. It just means that we're going from 0 to F. Cool. When we're writing a hexadecimal color, we're using a hashtag to say, hey, this is a hexadecimal color. And here's an example of one. 4B5320. I'm maybe thinking like, okay, but this looks like a whole like some code. And it is essentially a code. And what this is secretly a shorthand for the RGB function. Let me show you what I mean. These two digits represent the amount of red. So it's 40B. These two digits represent the amount of green. And these two digits represent the amount of blue. Let's play around with it and see what's going on here. Oh, thank you so much, Mitch. Yeah. So 16 times 16 is 256. Exactly. So if we want to make this, let's play around with it a little bit, actually. So they want us to put in 0, 0 for red, FF for green, and 0, 0 for blue. Now, F, remember, is 16. So FF is 16 times 16, which, as Mitch very correctly put here, is 256, which is the maximum value. Perfect. Wait. Yeah, sorry. I got distracted for a second. Actually, that's completely wrong, and I apologize. FF is 15 times 15. Wait, am I bad at math? I think I'm bad at math. Let me just do some math real quick. 50. I'm going to open up a calculator here. 15 times 15. Oh, hold on. Yep. So FF is 255. I apologize. I was doing bad math. So FF represents 255, which, as we know, is the maximum green. Let's see what happens, by the way, if we do FF00, which, if you remember, is combining red and green, gives us yellow. If we do all F, that gives us white. So 00FF00 gives us pure green. If we want about a halfway green, then we do something like, I don't know, 88. Gives us a sort of darker green. 99 is a bit brighter. ATA is a bit brighter, but what we want is pure green, so FF. So that's a different way of writing colors. And as you can see, it's a lot shorter than writing RGB, which is quite cool. Awesome. So that's done. Look at, see, I should not get ahead of Free Code Camp. They explain things so much better than I do. So there's 0 through 9, and then A, B, C, D, E, and F. So with hex colors, we have 0% red, 100% green, and 0% blue. So we're going to lower the intensity, setting that to 70F, which is about halfway. Cool. And all set. Let's move on to the next challenge. Now we're going to be using something even different, which is the hue, saturation, and lightness. And instead of me trying to explain this, let's go with what Free Code Camp tells us. So this is a function just like RGB that takes 3 values or arguments. One is a number from 0 to 360 for the hue. Then we've got a percentage from 0 to 100 for the saturation, and another percentage from 0 to 100 for the lightness. And this is the HSL, hue, saturation, and lightness. And between you and me, this is the one I use the least. Most colors I'm writing are done in hexadecimal. Here we go. And there's our color wheel. Hue red is at 0 degrees. That's this number here from 0 to 360, because there's 360 degrees in a circle, right? So at the very top at 0 degrees, it's at red. 120 degrees, it's at green. And 240 degrees, it's at blue. It's a little weird, but we'll play around with it and we'll get it. Saturation is the intensity of that color. So 0% saturation is gray, and 100% is that pure color. And we must add a percent sign to our saturation and lightness. And that lightness, by the way, is 0% for complete black, and 100% for complete white, and 50% is the neutral. We'll play around with it in just a minute. So let's see what we got. For our blue, they want us to use that HSL function to set the background color of our blue marker to be 240 for blue. Now we don't see it because, well, we have invalid values here. This should be percent. So let's just add a percent in here real quick. But that's a T. What I want is a percent. There we go. And a percent. Cool. So because the lightness is at 0%, it's going to be completely black. If we set it to 100%, that's going to be completely white. If we set it at 50, that's the neutral. So we're going to see, we're going to see gray. That's because the saturation is set to 0%. The higher the saturation goes, I set it to be 10. It's a little bit bluer. Set it to 20, it's a little bit bluer. 50% is like halfway blue. 60% is even bluer. 80% is even bluer. 100% pure blue. So this is a way using some like circle mathematics to make colors. And quite frankly, I always forget how this works. This exercise is always a reminder of how hue, saturation, and light work. But that's the way to do it. Awesome. Look at us just blazing through this. I'm going to do a couple more. I don't want to leave you without any homework, and I want to take an opportunity to answer some questions as well. Cool. So we've learned a few ways to set flat colors. Oh no, we're gonna do the gradient stuff. So we're gonna using a gradient, and a gradient is a color that transitions from one color to another. And this is a function using a function called linear gradient. So one thing to remember is that the linear gradient function actually creates an image element and is usually paired with a background property which can accept an image as a value. Okay. So remember yesterday when we had that background property instead of background color? We can use that to still have our color. Same thing, but it's good to be specific when you're gonna use a color. But okay, when we're gonna use a gradient, we wanna set this to be background instead of background color. Check our code, looks good. Next, we're going to be using our function linear gradient, which, takes 3 or more arguments. We'll get to that in a minute. So first is the first argument is the gradient direction. So which way the gradient goes from which side, like, does it go from top to bottom? Does it go diagonally? Does it go left to right? We'll see. Then we've got color 1. So it'll start with this color, and then it'll end with this color here. And these can be any kind of color. You can use a combination if you want of color keywords, or hex, RGB, or HSL. Hex, by the way, is short for hexadecimal. So first we're going to apply a red to green gradient along a 90-degree line to the first marker. So instead of using RGB here, we're going to delete that. We're going to use the linear gradient function. So first thing we see is this 90-degree argument. That's the direction, right? So that's going to be 90 deg. Deg is short for degree. And that's it. Yep. We're not going to do anything else just yet. This doesn't work, of course, because we haven't given it any colors. But this looks good. Free code cam's happy, and I'm happy. Now we're going to use the RGB functions for the colors of this gradient. So we're going to use the RGB function to set this first color argument to pure red. So in a function, you saw this with the RGB as well, you need to use commas. So 90 degrees, comma, RGB, and we can have a function inside a function. So RGB, you see we have a new pair of brackets. That's kind of tricky because now I'm seeing like 2 closing brackets. Fortunately, this editor helps highlight the pair of brackets, and sometimes that helps me debug stuff, because oftentimes I'll be like, wait, why isn't this working? It's because I've messed up my brackets. And these are the smooth brackets, not the curly ones. The curly ones are for the CSS declarations. For our functions, we use smooth brackets. Cool. So RGB set to pure red. So that's 255, 0, 0. Let me widen this a little bit. So we're calling the linear gradient function, which takes 2 arguments so far. One is the 90 degrees direction, and color one is the result of the RGB function, which itself takes 3 arguments: pure red, 0 green, 0 blue. We don't see anything yet, because our gradient needs to end on a color as well. So we're going to do that next. Cool. It's a lot, huh? So we won't see the gradient because the linear gradient needs at least 2 color arguments to work. And yes, it can be more than 2, but we'll get to that in a minute. We're going to set the argument, the second color, to be pure green using RGB. So after our first RGB, use a comma and go RGB. Now we're going to do 0 red, 255 green, and 0 blue. Now look. Now we've got a gradient that goes from red to green. Let's play with different gradients now, different directions. 0 degrees goes from bottom to top. See, starts at green. Well, it starts with red at the bottom and ends with green at the top. If we set it to be 180 degrees, flip that over. Now it's starting with red at top, green at the bottom. If we do 270 degrees, now it goes start with red on the right and end with green on the left. 90 degrees starts with red on the left and ends with green on the right. Well, that's a lot, huh? So that's how we do it. If we want to do it like diagonal, well, we'll just use 45 degrees. I can't quite see it, but you can see that gradient is starting with red here at the bottom left and ending with green at the top right. So there's all kinds of like math we can do here. And who doesn't love math? Maybe not me. Anyway, check our code, submit, we're good, go to the next challenge. So cool, we've produced a smooth red-green gradient. Use the RGB function to add pure blue as the third color argument. Yeah, you can have, I told you we can have more than 2. So RGB, 0 red, 0 green, 255 blue. Now it goes from red to green to blue. Well, it's quite cool. So that's a gradient. Amazing. We can move on to the next challenge. Now we can also use something called color stops to define where along our gradient the color should be. And these can be length units like pixels. We've seen pixels, or percentages that follow a color in the linear gradient direction. For example, in this red to black one, the transition from red to black takes place at 90% point along the gradient line. So red takes up most of the available space. We can see here. We have that 90 degree, then we do 90% red, and the rest is black. So in our linear gradient, we're going to add a 75% color stop after the first red color argument. So if I'm not mistaken, this gradient is going to be 75, not dollars. No, there we go. 75% red. And a little bit like the rest of the 25 is dedicated to the green and blue. And that's how we can fine tune our gradient. Awesome. So let's make our markers look more realistic. Ooh, I'm excited. So first we're going to set, and then we're going to wrap up after this so that I can give you all some homework. So let's do this gradient and then I'll let y'all go. 100 degrees. So now it looks like this, which is not exactly marker-like, but I'm sure we'll get there. Yeah, let's get this marker looking right. So set the color stop of the red to 0, the color stop of green to 50, and the color stop for blue to 100. So, okay, you can see this is getting quite long. So what I like to do in cases like this, and this is totally fine to do, is you can use the enter to sort of like put each argument on a separate line. I feel that flows a little bit more nicely. So you've got open bracket, 180, red, green, blue, and then close the bracket. But you got to make sure to close that bracket. Cool. So the first color stop needs to be 0. The second color stop needs to be 50% green. And the third color stop for blue needs to be 100%. All right. Cool. Looks good. This one is at 0. This one's at 50. This one's at 100. Check our code. Looks good. So now we're going to use different shades of red to sort of make our marker look more like a marker. So the shades at the top and bottom will be darker, while the one in the middle will be lighter, as if there's a light above our marker. And this is where it gets really cool, my friends. So I'm just going to add these like, you don't have to. Just for me, it becomes a little easier to work with, because otherwise these lines get quite long, and I'm sure it's difficult for y'all to read as well. So first color argument, currently pure red. Its value for red is going to be 122. Green is going to be 74, and the blue is going to be 14. You can see it's sort of a darker shade of red. Looks good. Let's move on to our next one. Now, our second argument, okay, I'm going to stop doing the enter thing. So our second argument is currently pure green. That's this one here. I'm going to set that to be 245 red. So not 100% red, just mostly red. Green is going to be 62. So there's a little bit of green and a little bit of blue. Interesting. So you see that has a little bit more of more of a softer but more realistic color. It doesn't look like a marker yet, but trust me, we'll get there. So that looks good. I bet we're going to do the third color now. Yep. So that's going to be 162 red, 27 green, and 27 blue. Look at that. That looks like it has a bit of a shadow to it. It's got like a realistic lighting to it. That's quite cool. So that's how we can use gradients to give and this is doing a little bit of a CSS art. And we're going to be doing a fair amount of that in this bootcamp as well. You might be thinking, how is this helpful for my web development? Trust me, you're going to be doing a lot of CSS. And CSS art is a great way to learn CSS. And that, my friends, is where we'll stop the dedicated lesson for today. So we're at step 60. Let's look at homework real quick. So let's go back to our lessons. Look at that. We did a good amount. We did like just under 2/3 of the lesson. My homework for you is and there's no pressure, in your own time to do the rest of these. I'd love to hear your experiences of going through them in the Discord or in the Free Code Camp forum. Please let us know if you have any questions. Also, if you have any answers for questions, please feel free to share those as well. Tomorrow, we're going to be back with doing HTML forms by completing a registration form. And tomorrow's Thursday. On Friday, we're going to be doing our first project, survey form. So don't miss that, my friends. Cool. Before we go, however, and I want to take an opportunity, if y'all have any questions, this will be a great time to ask them. And if not, we're around. So let's bring up Mark's question from before. When working with elements next to each other, what's the rule for setting a space between them? Do you adjust the margin or the padding first? How do you know which to adjust first? And Mason has an answer here that I would love to bring in. With the box model, padding will affect the inside of the border of the element, where margin affect the outside of the border. And the sort of the question on top of that is, cool, which one do you do first? And if a lot of elements inside a box or a container are going to have the same margin, actually, why am I doing this hypothetically when I could do it with code? Let me go back to a random lesson here. And I'll tell you what, we're gonna play around a little bit, if that's okay with y'all. So let's play around with these markers real quick. Okay, so let's say, for the sake of argument, let's give our container. Oh, I can choose now, can't I? I'm gonna go with 127 red, 0 green. Oh, look, I picked violet, my favorite color. Cool. So let's say let's remove let's keep the top and bottom padding for now. And for our markers, cool. Now let's say I wanted each of these markers, I wanted there to be some consistent space for every element inside our container, right? What I could do is for every element inside to have margin. Okay, let's go through this one way at a time. Let's say for every marker, I wanted to have a margin left of 10 pixels. And then I'm like, cool, but I want the other two markers to have that as well. So I'm going to do margin left of 10 pixels, right? Nice. And then for the third one, I'm going to do margin left. You see where this is getting tedious, right? And if I want to adjust the amount of margin here, there's a lot of room for error where I could forget to fill one of these in, or I put in a typo or something. So this is not an ideal way to set that margin. So you could be thinking, okay, cool, but then I could just do it for the marker, right? And that's extremely valid. Margin left. Now all markers are going to have a margin left of 10 pixels. Sweet. Fantastic. However, let's say, let me just switch back to my HTML real quick. Let's say I have an H2 in here that says, look at my markers. I know, so imaginative. Bear with me. Look at my markers. Cool. Notice the problem. There's no margin here. So, okay, cool. I need to go set the container that has an H2. That H2 should have a margin left of 10 pixels. Not ideal, because then if I want to adjust it, I'm going to have room for error. So what do? That's where we apply, instead of thinking about each element inside the container, let's look at the container and be like, well, the spacing inside it is going to be consistent. It's always going to be 10 pixels. That's where we can add padding left to be 10 pixels. Same thing. So now every element is going to start at 10 pixels from the left of the container. How do we do that here with padding? Same thing. So 10 pixels. But that's sorry. So that's applying a left and right padding. That's applying a left and right padding. Sorry, misspoke. That's applying a left and right padding. So how do we fix that? Well, we can do either. Now let me see if I remember this correctly. Top, right. We can actually put 4 values in here. Top, right, bottom, and left. So this is a shorthand for writing padding top, padding right, padding bottom, and padding left. This is going clockwise. If my camera's flipped, I'm going to do it the other way, clockwise. I don't know which way clockwise is, because sometimes the camera's flipped, you know? But yeah, that's doing it clockwise. So if I want to apply just a padding top and bottom and a left, that'll be top is 10, right is 0, bottom is 10, and left is 10. There we go. So I tend to I tend to prefer going for padding first if I'm going to be consistent about my spacing. So yeah, that answers that. Just gonna give you all a chance to ask more questions. If not, let me just throw out some more info while I'm here. Let me just open up badwebsite.club, make that a bit large so y'all can see where the lessons are. So if you go to badwebsite.club, you can go to the free web development bootcamp schedule and info, and there you find all of the details, when they take place, what time, where on channels, and very important, a Google Calendar. If you go into the Discord, you'll also have events in there. To get to the Discord, you can click here on the Bad Website Club Discord channel, and I'll put a link to that here into the chat. Well, friends, Cesium, thank you so much. So well put. Knowing when to adjust padding and when to adjust margin is an art learned with practice. And look, frankly, I mess it up all the time. It's just something that you get used to with time. But yeah, I think that covers everything for today. So if there's no questions, I'm just going to say thank you all so much for joining. We'll see you tomorrow, same time for the next lesson. And the other homework, as Jess would strongly recommend, is to just go easy on yourselves. We're all learning. It's all a lot. It's the start of the year. It's intense. So go have the easiest time now that we're done. and I wish you all the best for the rest of your day. Take care and bye for now.